That, congratulations. We'll go ahead and call the McHenry County Technical Advisory Committee meeting for March 5th to order with roll call. Steve Bicking.
Yes.
Michael Von Bergen.
Here.
Al Schmidt and Thomas Rose. I don't see them present. Mike Warner.
Here.
Jody McCarthy.
Here.
Brian Valesky. Bruce Meyer.
Here.
Lori Ryan.
Here.
See Dan Ziller or Seth. Not present. Scott Hayjack. Here. Spring Duffy.
Here.
Ernest Varga.
Here.
Darren Olson.
Here.
Brad Andresen will be late. Tyler Wilkie, Cody Book, I don't see them present. We have a quorum. So with that, we'll continue to the next item in the agenda, which is the minutes approval from the February 5th meeting. Is there any discussion, any comments, any motions to approve?
So move.
First, moved by Bruce. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second by Ernest. Any discussion? Hearing none. We'll go to vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Minutes are approved. There's no public comments, so we'll move to item number 4, members' comments. Any comments from our members today? Anything on your minds, specifically to this? Y'all got a lot on your minds. All right. With that, I thought before we move to item number 5, I thought we'd just get the calendar out of the way under item number 6. So in your packets, that's one of the last, it's the last pages at the back. We switched the dates to accommodate mostly some of you. Brad and Grayson with Village of Algonquin, he has meetings during this time. So this schedule here is for the second Wednesday, 8:30 a.m. So we did move it a little bit earlier from the 9:30 time slot, but I think that was with all of everyone's input. So this is what the dates look like. Now I will, March is relatively busy for staff. So coming out in terms of the next steps for the April meeting, I was going to ask all of you if we could cancel that April 8th meeting, just because if, whatever comes out of it, preparation of documents, etc., next items, I don't think staff will have enough time to really make it a worthwhile meeting for all of you in April. So that would be the only thing I would throw out there.
Move to cancel April 8th meeting.
Second.
Okay, and with that motion, approve
The rest of
the rest
the
of, okay.
calendar.
And we're also incorporating the time change, right? Because next meeting will not be at 9:30, it'll be at 8:30.
8:30 time change too.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so Mike,
That's
with
part-
that motion,
Yeah.
seconded by Darren.
Are you off on Veterans Day?
Yeah, is that one of these
That's
days?
the 11th. That's the 11th of November.
Well, look, we can,
Let me get you.
why don't we get closer to that, and if you guys want to have a separate meeting in November, we can cancel it. Or do you guys want to cancel it now? It's right around Thanksgiving usually, the November dates usually go by the wayside, but up to you folks, I guess. We can wait. It's not a big deal we can discuss it. I'll bring it up in September if you guys want. Okay.
I guess we know it won't be that day.
It won't be that date, yes. It will not be that date, absolutely. So with that, we'll just go ahead and, I guess if there's no more discussion about it, approve it as is, canceling April. The November date, we can discuss at a later meeting on, we'll see what's on the agendas and we can decide if we want to meet at that time. So, hearing no other discussion, we'll move to vote. All in favor of the changes as discussed?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, guys have it, we have it on the calendar. We haven't sent out new invites, we will do that right after the meeting. I'll have my admin staff update the calendar invites for all of you, so. Okay, so now jumping back to item number 5. At our last meeting, so this is going to be page 5 of the packet. At the last meeting, Board Member Von Bergen was here to basically ask the question of having a separate threshold, a larger impervious area threshold of 1 acre for potentially larger properties exceeding 30 acres was kind of the suggested amount before any kind of detention or analysis would be triggered, and primarily this would be for agricultural properties, etc. So in doing that, we sat down internally. So as part of the discussion, this was meant to just be a summary of what we found. So issue number 1 here, just running through this as part of the discussion, is the location of the impervious area matters in relation to the proximity of property lines. That was something that we had discussed in general, that, you know, yes, it's a good idea. And so that was the first issue. And then we got into a discussion of potentially requiring a certain setback, that this is going to be further back from the property line. And so one of the issues with that we discussed is that even if you put a distance on it, you still have to factor in the slope and other various conditions before anyone would feel comfortable just placing a generic setback potentially. So the other, number 2 and number 3, imposing a setback also may be difficult for municipalities to adopt it, because when we're talking about impervious area, let's say it's a parking area, if you're requiring a certain setback, that might interfere with the municipality's zoning requirements for parking lots or buildings or things like that. So I don't, as far as I'm aware, that might be a hurdle, but we have not approached state's attorney on that. But just to give you an example, that was one of the reasons. For example, the sensitive aquifer recharge area, that piece of language exists in our unified development ordinance because it caps the impervious percentage at 50% for developments that are within that SARA area. I'm in the understanding that we could not do that in the SMO because it's a countywide ordinance. You're now passing on potentially zoning requirements onto municipalities that we don't have jurisdiction over. So I can try to get more clarity on that, but just, you know, throwing that out there. Yeah.
A little confusion on my part. There are county ordinances that are imposed even within municipalities. As an example, you may be in a municipality, but you want a septic system, you're still going to abide by the McHenry County Department of Health, which is a county organization. So you sure we can't, I mean, I guess to me it's a state's attorney question, but.
Yeah, I think it, you know, obviously with the state statute, the health component could be a little bit different.
Could be.
Right, so, but that was my understanding, is that that's why it's in the UDO. So you're right, but when it comes from a zoning perspective and land use perspective, that's my understanding. We can't, as a county, you know, tell them how to enforce land use laws within their boundaries, if you will. So, so that's my point of if we have a setback in place, that's why the SMO doesn't have setbacks, it doesn't have restrictions, it's all related to, you know, so.
So I thought this was like talking about agriculture though, for the 30 acres in this.
Yeah, but.
Nothing to do within the municipality, you wouldn't have, I mean, you can have 30 acres, but this was more to deal with the agricultural stuff is what she was talking about.
I understand, Mike, but I don't, again, it's just a hurdle, right? If you're gonna throw an agricultural exemption, that the municipalities might still have agricultural boundaries, and it might work, I don't know. If they're, you know, if this is a setback that's greater than, if it's more restrictive than what the municipalities have, I just don't know. I'm just throwing that out there, that is a potential roadblock, where we can't necessarily pass any kind of setback or distances related to improvements because of infringing on those, I don't know, rights or whatever, you know, the municipalities' rights, et cetera. So I guess from your perspective.
Within the municipality though, but you're not talking, I'm just thinking at the county level.
Right, but the problem is, the state statute says we need a countywide ordinance. So then can I come in and say, hey, municipalities, you don't have to do this, unincorporated, you can do that?
Well, can't you do like Cook County does with the exemption of?
Cook County's
Cook County,
exemption is in
or
state
McKenna
statute.
County.
Well, I was gonna say Cook County's, are you talking about like the Chicago
Why can't
area?
you write the exemption of a municipality into the ordinance?
Again,
If that supersedes it.
I can't, if it's a state statute and the SAO says, the state says you can, it's the same question for the solar farms currently that we're dealing with, right? So I would love to, if the state's attorney says yes, then that's fine, but as I understand it, that's why we couldn't bring in something like the Sarah area into the SMO and why it exists. There's a couple of those relics that exist in our in the zoning ordinance as opposed to the stormwater ordinance because of this hiccup. But I can get another interpretation from them and see what it looks like. Before I did that, I just wanted to outline all of the things that we've discussed. And so when it comes to item number 4, I provided some calculations there for the analysis on the different peak rates on the next page for you guys, just so you can see, the differences of what you would have if we did go with 1 acre, what the values are, just a justification that the half acre is probably best. I mean, we talked about analyzing for our simplified method using, if it's pipe flow, 1 CFS, if it's swales, around 2 1/4. So, the 1 acre pulls in a lot more of the storm events that would kind of exceed our simplified method. Whereas under the half acre, you're more towards the 10-minute to 3-hour, right? So if it's assuming swales, where if you go to 1 acre, you're incorporating a lot more. You're capturing more of the storms that occur, and that is an issue. And so it goes back to then you probably want to establish some kind of setbacks, but we're still requiring some type of analysis with all of it. And so I just don't know how to do it cleanly with removing completely any type of consideration like the half acre does. That's kind of what we're looking at. So that was our conclusion. And with the simplified method, as we go through it, I think that before we establish that simplified method currently, anyone can go in and figure out just how much impervious area they have. It's not just the 1 acre, and that doesn't require you to jump through engineering hoops at the same time. And so I think a lot of this, requests on larger properties and having a little bit less restriction, I feel like there's less of a burden at this point once we kind of go through that simplified method to show you guys how it would work. It's kind of being captured, right? And so anyone looking to develop, instead of, they can again come in and take a quick look and figure out, is it 4 acres, is it 5 acres of impervious, how much of that 10% cap can they have before they trigger detention? This would set up a really easy path for you to figure that out. And so I feel like having something at the 1 acre where you're not worried about detention, I feel like most people are just going to come in and try to figure out what the maximum is that they can have regardless with this new path. So is it even necessary to throw in a 1 acre and kind of work through these hurdles? So that's kind of what I wanted to open up for discussion before before we wrote anything or asked the state's attorney to look at it, to get and collect everyone's thoughts on these ideas. And if you want, I can jump into the simplified method and we can bring this into the discussion. So however you get, we can take any comments now, or you can kind of hold your thoughts and I can kind of jump into the simplified method a little bit further.
So the simplified method is what you would use to show that you can put in half an acre of new impervious.
Yeah, or up to 10% of your property if you're at a larger parcel. So in my example, I use a 77 acre, parcel as
Got it.
an
Okay.
example. And so that's my point, is it's quicker, it's easier, and you're gonna be able to get an answer just how much impervious area you can have before you trigger any detention.
So the cap isn't half an acre, the cap is 10.
For impervious without potentially needing detention, yes. But this is the trigger, if you will. The request was, can we increase the trigger to 1 acre for certain properties before we even consider any analysis? So right now, if you're less than a half an acre, doesn't matter. You don't need to do detention. You don't need to provide any reasoning, nothing. And so the request was, can we do that for 1 acre on larger parcels? And so part of the issues is, well, you do need to consider where you're putting that. And so that was a discussion, is the distance. And now if you have distance concerns, you're potentially looking at a setback. There's still additional questions of, well, if it's if the slope is severe, might need to be further than that. And now you're talking about an analysis that would be captured in that simplified method. And so that's kind of the rub we were looking at, is you're really putting a very narrow band on this 1 acre to have to do additional regulations and requirements that kind of complicates things. And it's unclear how it would be passed to the municipalities if it was a separate. I mean, we could maybe word it differently. I don't know. There's probably a mechanism we can use to do it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we can explore that, but that was kind of what was going in our minds, is if someone's looking to put up 1 acre of impervious on a 77 acre parcel, they're probably going to ask, well, can I go up to the 10% anyway? Go through the exercise, get their answer. So do we even need to include this 1 acre component and use it as an exemption for ag and only in unincorporated areas of the county? Potentially.
I'm lost. So on last month's packet, where you're using the 77 acre one, is that still hold up to the new page that you gave us? This same calculations for that?
This calculation on page 6 is just meant to show you guys what the different flows are between the half acre and the 1 acre.
Okay.
And the consideration there would be, so if we, let's say.
So is that the same volumes in that example from last month?
No, this is just the 1 acre, half acre area.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand.
But it's the
Yeah,
same
but
ideas,
It's
yeah.
the same.
Same ideas. I'm gonna go, that's why I'm
Okay.
saying, if you
Alright.
want, I can roll into that, because it's part of this discussion. So I can show you what it looks like. But the idea here was just to demonstrate that if we go to a 1 acre and you don't, and we say, yeah, it doesn't matter what happens with the 1 acre, you pick up more rain events that would potentially cause issues as you would with a half acre. And so on any given year, if, let's say on average, you're gonna experience a 6-hour storm, if under the half acre, that's not really gonna be an impact, then, that would make sense. But if you go to 1 acre of impervious, what I'm saying is across the year, a lot more storm events are gonna have an impact towards potential flood risks, as opposed to the half acre. That's kind of what this data is meant to provide, what these values increasing near double. And so you're even nearing that 12-hour storm event here, where you're seeing a pretty good peak flow compared to the existing, where in the existing a 6-hour event and a 12-hour event under a half acre, might not be said, considered such a big flood risk as compared to the 1 acre.
So,
It's just meant to drive the discussion that the half acre is probably a good threshold. And
right,
if you're gonna bump it up, you need to make all of these other considerations behind it. And if you're gonna do that, you're getting into an analysis kind of point. And if we're developing the simplified method, it's gonna take care of
You're
that.
trading apples for oranges is basically what you're
Yeah, and trying to do this exemption, what would be the point?
so going to the 1 acre is too risky to use as a blanket exemption. So, but you're saying 10%. So can you just briefly describe, like, for the 77 acre parcel, if you go up to 10%, that means you can have 7.7 acres of impervious surface.
Yeah.
And so what type of scenario would that be acceptable? So how would you mitigate for the 7.7 acres without detention?
So that's going through this process of what we're calling the county simplified method.
Right.
And
So
that-
what does it look like in the field? Like, what's features are there to offset the 7.7 acres of impervious?
Well, in the 7 acre example, I only showed a snippet of it, but it was a large parcel with a large swale going through the middle,
Okay,
right? And so what that showed was if you increase it by 1 acre, you show very little difference in the flow rate. And that was the idea behind the simplified method, is showing and is considering what is the outfall. Is it a swale or is it a pipe? And if it's a swale, in the critical duration conditions, you can't, the maximum difference between existing and proposed for your impervious can't exceed one CFS.
okay,
And we would consider that minimal flood risk because 1 CFS equates to about 1/10 of a foot increase
Right.
in high water level in the pipe.
so what if you modified that swale to, like, with ditch checks and
Right, so-
inflow and stuff like that?
So that was the idea behind the 77 acres. If you look at 1 acre, the flow rates, and this is using rational method, but the flow rates didn't really change. And then I had a comparison for the 10%. You did see an increase by more than 2 CFS, I think it was around 9. However, if you actually analyzed it and looked at the swale and ran a analysis of whatever the program is, cut a cross section and ran the analysis, you find, and I had the calculations, you find that it increases by 0.03 feet. So the increase is still within 1/10, and you're able to then say it's still minimal flood risk because that is what we're considering as minimal flood risk, less than 1/10 of an increase in that infrastructure. But the idea to avoid the engineer's analysis is to say, in simple cases, if it's less than 1 CFS for pipes, less than 2 1/4 for swales, we know it's going to be 1/10 of an increase or less. So if you have something like this, you then use the engineer where he can perform the analysis to give you a direct result for something that is, I can't remember, the bottom was 50, it's like a 50-foot wide swale.
Okay, thanks.
So I kind of jumped around here. Should I don't know, where do you guys want to go? Do you want me to go over the language here and then jump into it? And then we can circle back and whether we want to do an additional 1 acre question. Okay. So this language is still the same. What would happen is you have a site, you have more than a half acre of impervious, so it triggers this requirement where the applicant would need to demonstrate that the development poses minimal flood risks, which in this case would be dictated by less than 1/10 of a foot increase in that downstream infrastructure. So I had pulled some calculations to show that for a pipe, it's about 1 CFS is where you would see it. Now, Sure, it's gonna vary, is it on the bottom half full or is it on the top half full, but in general, it kind of varies right around there. And then for a swale, and that was a 24-inch pipe at 0.5%, I believe. I have to pull those numbers. So that was something that I had asked you guys, we can change that standard, but I think from discussions, we're not gonna see too many 12-inch culverts underneath roadways. And so, sure, are we gonna find some examples, but, is that a small 5%? And we're capturing the other 95, I feel like that's a pretty good. And then for the swales, it was 3 foot wide, 3-to-1 side slopes. Again, I think 0.5% is what I used, and 1/10 of an increase in that resulted in about 2.25 CFS. So using those as kind of the minimum standards, you take a look, so you have to meet condition 1, which is the existing conditions are not changing, so you're not doing anything to change those. We want to maintain those. Number 2 is that your discharge flows to a channel. If it's sheet flowing off, then it's really hard to factor in 1/10 of an increase. So this would be for areas and potentially the person can make some improvements where it's dedicated to something like that, right? But that's the other condition, and then the third condition is that 1/10 of a foot increase. So then we added number 4, or you can have the engineer analyze that and see if you have that 1/10 of a foot increase, and that's that 77-acre example that we just went over. Also, the enforcement officer could, if it's a known flooding area, could add additional, analysis or requirements on that. If there's information, flood studies have been done, et cetera, to allow them to incorporate that. So we don't want to supersede a detailed study that is indicating flooding, and then this person's just going to add to it without detention requirements. So that's what B is meant to do. So skipping down then to do that analysis, what I brought back was the 2-acre example. So here's the property, I'm doing 1 acre of impervious in this 2-acre tributary area. The tributary area I cut in half to around the house just to make it easier on myself. But again, this is more of a sheet flow, but I just for simplification, I went to a random property, found something that kind of worked, if you will, on the smaller side. And then there was the 77-acre example. I didn't include the full picture, but I'm adding an acre of impervious off to the side here. Everything flows to the south into that larger swale. So I ran a rational method calculation. So the top one is your 2-acre parcel. I use the same time of concentration from the modeling, and I pulled the intensity off of our current Bolton 75, and then I was able to get a Q value. Now, what I did here a little bit differently for the curve number and the C value. So for those not familiar, the way that the equation works is your flow is equal to your area times this intensity, which is supposed to represent the rain event in inches per hour, times this C coefficient. And the C coefficient is basically a direct percentage of how much of runoff you're going to get from that storm. So if you have a C of 1, 100% runoff. If you have a C of 0.5, 50%. So what I ended up doing, and we still wanting to use the curve number methodology, I took, let's see if it's in here. Oh, I didn't include it. Well, I apologize, I can pull it up. But what I took was, I took the curve numbers, and I just went from 100 curve number up to 30, which is the minimum, and I ran percentages. So at 100 curve number in the 100-year event, it's 8.57 inches per hour. And then I just went through, and so you can then, for a percentage of 0.63, that correlates to a curve number of 74. So if you're getting 8.57 inches in 100%, 63%, you're going to get X amount of inches, which corresponds to a curve number of 74. So it's just translation of that information, if that makes sense. So we don't lose the ability, if we want to do the rational method, we don't lose the ability to continue with our curve number methodology. So you can still type in a curve number, and here, I'll pull it up for you guys just to show you. I apologize, I didn't realize I didn't have this in here.
Is that method that you're describing, is that, is that something that you created, or it's an accepted practice?
No, I mean, like I said, the C value is a percentage of the direct rainfall you're gonna get.
Okay,
So the curve number, right, curve number of 100, I get 8.57.
yes, you
That's
can,
100. So all I did was I basically took this, divided by this, and it got me this. So a curve number of
So you can-
99 is 99% of your rainfall. A curve number of 90, you get 7.36 inches of rain in using the TR55. That's 86% of your 8.57.
well, the curve number, you can translate that to an abstraction amount, correct?
Yeah, that's in here. That's
The-
part of the, so you have your curve number, you have your abstraction amount, and then you
Okay.
get your rainfall. So
Okay.
if you have no abstractions, again, curve number of 100, no abstractions, you get the full 100% of the 8.57,
Okay,
24 hours.
so you're,
So I just mapped what each curve number gives me in
Yeah.
terms of rainfall, and then I looked at the percentage that relates to. And so you can see, like, if you wanted to use a percentage for 98%, there is none.
Okay.
So I just took each curve number, and then and then that's how you get the percentages to get your C value. So it's just a direct, so because this way, otherwise what we would have to do is we're looking to create a curve number table, we'd have to create a countywide C
no, I get,
value
no, I
table.
understand, I just was following, I didn't hear the abstraction, but you did use that and then just subtracted that from the rainfall amount.
Yeah, this value here for the Q is your direct TR55 equation. I did not change anything for that. So it takes into your abstraction, which is the 0.2
Okay,
standard that you have. Your S again is, so everything's pretty standard. So then all I did was I said at a curve number of 40, what percentage of 8.57 is this rainfall amount? Well, it's 18%.
and you use the 24-hour,
Yep.
100-year as your benchmark.
Yeah, because that's what the tension is, right? The
Yeah.
24,
Okay,
that's the standard storm that we use. So it's just a straight translation. There's nothing lost in the calculations. We can continue to use curve numbers and develop a curve number table. And so in the rational method, when someone's using our spreadsheet, they would punch in a curve number behind the scenes. It would pull from this data.
okay, thanks.
Could they calculate their own C value?
Well, so if they wanted to, though, we'd have to confirm that, right? And so, those C values for pervious have those ranges, and we talked about in the curve numbers currently, if you're given a range, the engineer is going to try to take the bottom side. And I'm sure as reviewers, you guys see that a lot. And so even with the curve numbers, you see a B/C, you're going to take that B all day. And by all means, you're allowed to do that. And so that's why we were trying to simplify and develop a McHenry County curve number table. I was just trying to avoid to do a curve number table and a C value table. And in my mind, since the C value is a direct percentage based, I can just use the curve numbers and derive the same and not
Is it-
have to do two.
Is this going to be an appendix then in the ordinance?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, again, I thought I had included this in your packet. I apologize, I didn't, but it's just working with math. I haven't done anything. I haven't made any assumptions. I'm using, all methods from the literature and just, so going back, so that's why I put a curve number, and then that's how I'm getting those C values. And so here's the existing conditions in the rational method. You get 11.87 in the proposed 16.94, a flow difference of 5.07. So how does that compare to the critical duration? We had about a 6. So it's within range, I suppose. But this was, this is the critical duration from actually running a hydrograph model. Same thing for the 77 acre. I punched it all in, same idea, same methodology. With that one, what we found was in 1 acre impervious, there's not much change. So I did another, that was the question for the 10%, right? And analyzing it in the system, the high water level increased from 0.82 to 0.84. Sorry, is that 2? Ha, there we go. Nobody said anything. Hey, I can't see anything. I mean, you have your packets, but. So we went from 0.84 to 0.82, so it's still within that 10th. However, that peak flow, the difference was 9.42. So that would trigger the need for the engineer to confirm that downstream infrastructure doesn't increase by more than a 10th. So how does that compare to the rational method? It's all up here. Zoom out a little bit. Flow difference of 6.3. So obviously the rational method, as you go larger, 50, 60, 100 acres, you're going to have more of a discrepancy there with the rational method. But I guess the main idea is it's still showing that if you use this, it's still confirming that even with the 10%, you have a drastic flow increase greater than that 2.25, so you need to go and have an engineer analyze it. At a bare minimum, when this comes in to staff will obviously have an ability to look at it, but as mentioned, I don't have a way to do a spreadsheet method to do the hydrographs. However, we can do the rational method, and these are the 2 examples that we had been kind of using, and I just wanted to show that the data would still, that the flow differences are off, and we would expect it to be off with the rational method, but I guess the question would be, is there a comfort level that it's still consistent with the idea and you're getting the same results if you were to run a hydrograph analysis? So that's what the change was. And as I mentioned last meeting, for those of you that weren't there, unless the county does some graphical representation or method, the TR55, the way they're able to avoid or able to use a spreadsheet is that they ran a lot of different scenarios and created a graphical connection. And so we would use that, but they only did it for type 1 and type 2 storms. They didn't do it for the HUFs. So we'd have to do something similar for the HUFs to have the spreadsheet method. Or we can use the rational method, which, again, with these 2 examples, it seems to work. I haven't run a whole variety of other examples, but the ideas are still the same. And I don't know how, we can nitpick this, and I don't know how many would fall through the cracks, and I feel like they'd probably be a minor amount, if that. And so, again, I always say, to have regulations that capture 100% of what's going on is unrealistic. So if we're at 90%, 95%, even 80%, let's say, I feel like that's a pretty good threshold. Obviously, there's the caveat of the enforcement officer having the ability to, and have additional requirements, et cetera, in situations. But this is how we can still have the full system. Also, currently, what would happen is my GIS is not going to have the resources to put a tool together this year. So if we were to implement this, I would still have it in here, but on our website we would say, tool coming, but we would still have, half-hour sessions for people to come in with staff and be able to run this. If they come and run it with staff, then we would still have the ability to do the hydrographs as opposed to the spreadsheet. But it would be a little bit of on the applicant or owner, whoever wants to use it, to make sure they get their tributary area correctly and their flow path, time and concentration correctly. But we would have those, you know, it might be like twice a month for 3 hours. You schedule for a half-hour block, come in, show us what you got. We'll get your tributary, we'll get your TC, we'll punch it in, yes or no type of thing. So that wouldn't change. We'd still have that even if we did have the tool to be able to grab the area and grab the time and concentration from our LiDAR data. Which our LiDAR data will, I believe, will become public soon via a website. You can go on there and explore. It already has some of this information. It's just on larger watersheds and larger flow paths.
What year is it? What year was it flowing?
It's 2022 data.
Okay.
But they're working with the vendor to have a website available where you can access all that information, so you can use it. It's pretty cool. I mean, you can see the trees and everything, signs, etc. So it'll all be there for everyone to use. But unfortunately, we can't right now develop something that's gonna, you know, cut in property lines and do that analysis. But the idea is the tool would resemble kind of USGS stream stats, right? You go in, you put a pin where you want your property, it's gonna use that, create an area, use the flow path, create a time concentration, and then you can punch that into a spreadsheet that will run these numbers, because once you have this, you're good to go. So it's just making sure that they can get the TC. Once they get the TC, they punch it in again. There would be a similar kind of table for your intensities, just to show you that, yes.
Question.
Yeah.
So your two examples, I don't know if
Here's
this,
your intensities.
I don't know if this is an issue or not. I just wanted to make sure I understood that. Is that you're doing the critical duration analysis for these two examples. What did you use for that?
HydroCAM?
Okay.
Yeah, so.
And then the rational method is equation-based. And that one, it comes up with a proposed flow in both examples that's about 150% more than your critical duration analysis. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's an issue. I just wanted to raise that as an item.
Yeah, it's
Your
gonna be higher.
rational method is much higher flow.
Correct. It's gonna be higher, but I think that the thing is that if you're using rational method, you're doing an apple-on-apple comparison between existing and proposed. So I think the main thing to look at is not the difference in peak flows between existing condition, or between the rational method and hydrographs. It's what is the flow difference within both models. So the flow difference in the 2 acres between the rational method existing and proposed is 5.07 CFS. If you look at the critical duration, in the critical it's 6.
So it's close. Okay.
I mean, again, the definition of close here, but I think, you know, the idea is because we have thresholds of 1 CFS and 2.25. Again, can we probably drum up some scenarios where the rational method would allow it through versus the critical duration not allowing it through? Sure, but, you know, is that gonna happen on such a large scale that we have to throw out the rational method altogether? I don't think so, but that's why I'm sharing the data with you, because you know, I'm not the only one that's interpreting it here, although you are as well, and so,
Can
you
you pull
know.
the spreadsheet back up where you did the conversion between the two?
Which one? So I have the
CRN.
Yeah, the conversion from curve number to,
CVAL.
So
Yeah.
there's a assumption that the rational method breaks down over a certain drainage area size, isn't there?
At 20,
And I don't.
generally 20
I
acres.
think, well, from the literature, it's at about 30, 35. So if you're going larger, yes, there is that.
Can you scroll down just a little bit? I'm just looking at like rational method versus curve number. Like typically agricultural areas, I don't know, Mike and Jody, you probably know this too, like existing conditions ag areas would be like in the upper 70s, low 80s
Yeah.
for curve number. And then we look at the C values in some of these charts, it's like 0.5 and 0.6. So then you would have potentially, you know, if somebody.
Yeah, which,
calculated-
I think row crop, you're hitting right around these mid-70s, so you're right at that 0.6 range. And I think that's the problem with your C values, you do have wide ranges depending on the literature that you look at.
I think it's more the soil type, right? So the soil type, if you have, I mean, you're right, for A and B soils, you may be in the 70s, but for like C soils, you'd be, I think you're typically up in the like upper 70s and lower 80s I've seen
Yes.
for curve numbers.
Right, so like, so that, again, if you're in the upper 80s, then, or in the 80s, then, I think that the main thing though is that the C value is a direct percentage of your flow that's coming off, right? So 50, a 0.5 C value is 50%. That's how the equation, that's how the math is set up. The relationship, it's not quite a 1-to-1, it's like 1 to 1.01, but everybody's accepted it that it's a 1-to-1. If you're gonna have a C value of 0.75, 75% of your rainfall is leaving the site. And so, although then, you know, they try to take that and put a land cover to it to say, okay, well, for agriculture, you're gonna have about 50%. That's all that's happening here, but this is directly related to your curve number, which is what we want anyway. So in my opinion, this works better because you actually have a direct connection. There's no doubting that a curve number of 75, 65% of your storm event is running off.
To your point though, I feel like there are, like if we had a professor in here or Ralph Stark, we would be told like all the things that, how these two don't correlate, because I think we would have a chart like in a book somewhere if they truly did correlate. Because I know we've had cheat sheets throughout the years, but we've always been told there isn't a direct correlation. I'm sure there's something wrapped in the numbers.
Well, I'm just looking at like if I look at a C value with the rational method for agricultural land with packed bare soil, I'm getting a C value of 0.5 or 0.6. So then when I take that 0.5 or 0.6 and go up and relate it to a curve number, that's a curve number of 67, 68. I can guarantee you if somebody then independently calculated a curve number for agricultural land with bare packed soil, that's like in the 80s.
Well, but yeah, it depends on the soil type too, because you can get down to some, like the average C-type soil you're getting in this kind of low to mid 70s off tier 55. I'll go to tier 55. You can get curve numbers of 60. It's in there
With the right
yeah,
soil
right.
numbers.
Yeah. So I think that C value data you're getting is still telling you the same things, and not. It's just.
It's not, you're looking wrong, it's not for me.
So, here, we'll go, hold on.
And I guess the point I'm getting at, Stoyan, is like, rather than trying to correlate CN to C, can't we just let people pick one method or the other and stick with it? In my mind, that's like the most defensible way. I agree with what we're trying to do,
Whether it's flow or volume.
but it's the most defensible way is to have them start on
Sure.
a certain methodology and proceed that way rather than trying to convert from one to the other.
Well,
Because
like
when
I
I'm
said,
trying to convert here, I'm not getting the same numbers.
so you have some C value table in front of you? What am I doing here? do you currently have something up for C values?
Just the one in here.
All right, let me get to the table. So here's your row crops, right? So you were mentioning that if you can have a range from 60s up to 80s. That's what I'm saying, that's what I'm seeing here. It's the same thing you're saying, I just,
But the values I'm seeing here, and for C value, go from everywhere from 0.05
Right.
in sandy soil to the maximum I'm seeing here is 0.6. So you're saying the range from curve numbers is from 60 to upper 80s.
I'm saying that those C values are less reliable than the curve number, and I'd rather do a conversion on the curve number than the C value. I mean, would you ever accept, like, if you're doing a review, what's the lowest C value you would accept on agricultural?
It would be based on the charts.
Right, so, but if the chart says a minimum of 0.05 and the engineer submits a 0.05, would you accept it because that's the minimum? Or are you gonna be like, okay, well, that's the range, I would need to know more information on it? Because I feel like you would probably say, I guess I should speak for me, I would wanna get more information on it. Because I wouldn't, that means that you're only getting 5% runoff from ag?
For a pasture with sandy soil in a woodland setting.
Okay. Well, if we did something similar, so pasture in good A condition, I'm down at 39. And a 39 equates to 0.16, which is right in the same range. So again, I think it's, I think it's workable completely. But it's my opinion, that's why I bring it up to you guys.
There's a C value table, I think, in the TR 55 right above the.
Is there?
Okay, maybe not. Maybe that's it, that talks about the, your impervious. That's
right
the-
here?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
impervious area percentages,
For
and how it equates to
residential
different
district. Yeah.
in commercial.
Yes, you do have some information here, but yeah, that, again, whatever the conditions are, you want sandy soils in a pasture, or if you consider it more of a meadow, then you're right down into that 0.05 range.
I have an engineer question. So when you do an analysis like this, and say you have 40 acres and it has 6 different soil types on it, and between B and A soil, how do you average that, or how do you
You weight
come
it.
up with that?
You weight it,
Okay.
like each area you would that 3 acres is this
Yeah,
value
yep.
and 3 acres is this.
Okay.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Were these the analysis you're gonna do, like the half-hour increment with people? Can people in municipalities come in too and have that analysis done for them? Because I mean,
Sure.
without the
Sure.
stuff being out there, maybe.
Well, we would make it available, and obviously that would be training to the municipality so that if they wanted to, give that option, but sure, no, it doesn't. We get questions from incorporated areas regardless, so, yeah, it wouldn't, anyone can use it. And if the municipality prefer to send people to us, then.
Yeah,
that
from a
would be-
time frame and a complexity standpoint, maybe that would be, the municipalities.
I do want to say that obviously with this, the person is triggering this analysis, so it's coming in for review. So whether they're using a rational method or not, you're still able to review the data. And if you think that this is potentially one of those that's going to fall between the gaps, you can run a hydrograph analysis and have a comparison and indicate to them like, hey, we ran this and it falls short. So we can, there's still the review component behind this and approval and verification. The idea is that someone would do this and then submit it as their backup to say, this is why I don't need detention, I'm not increasing the high water level in that infrastructure by more than 1/10 of a foot, which is floodplain standards. So if it works for floodplain standards, it's gonna work in the other areas. And again, the idea here is that we're limiting to, a ditch that's 3 feet wide at 3 to 1 and a 24-inch pipe. The likelihood is there's gonna be a lot more infrastructure that exceeds that. So even when they use this method, they're still gonna need that additional analysis from an engineer, but it simplifies the process and it's not as labor intensive from that perspective. And I don't know, if we develop this, maybe down the line, we can have tools where people can, put in how wide is your ditch, how big is your pipe. We can have that too, and then, it turns into a case-by-case scenario, but I feel like we're not ready for that, just because the tool needs to be very, very easy to use for people to go in and get information from. But that's where I want to get to, and so leading back to the idea of having additional exemptions at 1 acre, 2 acre, whatever impervious, I don't think it would be needed with this type of setup, because it's very quick and easy, and you would know right away, not just at 1 acre, but can you have up to 10%? Is it closer to 6%, 7%? And so it kind of makes the idea of needing additional thresholds, not required, with some of the hoops we'd have to jump through to put that in place. You guys are quiet. I know, and then, it's obviously new information that I'm presenting, and I'm with you guys. I would prefer to use the hydrographs, but I don't have a way to do it in the spreadsheet method. And at some point in the future, there's free software out there and things like that, and maybe the county can figure something out to have one of those tools. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to belabor this. So we would let people calculate, so this is if they are providing, or they're gonna put down more than half an acre, they're going up to the 10%, and we're gonna let them do a calculation showing that they're not increasing from existing to proposed runoff by a certain certain flow rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not talking about volumes, we're talking flow rates.
That would correlate to then an analysis of this flow rate would overwhelm a 24-inch pipe or this infrastructure, or
Yeah.
more than the 10th increase, yeah.
So in my mind, like a curve number is pretty complex, and you're going to develop some GIS software, but it's going to have to take into consideration soils and land cover and all that. So they'll be able to draw a box over something, and I'm assuming this will just calculate a curve number for them, right?
No, we would probably have an option of land descriptions, and you would need to choose your land description, and it would pop in a curve number. And so,
But soils, they would have soils. too,
well,
right?
that was, so I think part of the conversation, and I'd be happy to go, and I haven't really gone into those specifics unless everybody feels comfortable with this. Sounds like maybe there's some comfort, you're starting to kind of go. So I think the idea behind the curve numbers is that we would have an existing and proposed one curve number to eliminate, the potential for, so we would go conservative on it, is what I think we would do. We could still allow the use of the soils and USDA and things like that if we wanted to.
I think you have to.
So your tool would just pick one curve number, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, so like if your existing conditions are agricultural, right, instead of having, I don't know, what is this, 15, 20, 25 different choices, we'd boil it down to one.
In other words, they would pick the number for you, either on the high end of the range,
Or the
to
low end.
eliminate the parameterization of the soil.
So it's not like there's 20 or however many rows there, but you have to multiply that by all 4 soil types, right? If you're not going to take soils into consideration.
Well, we would, it's just, we would probably, the consideration would be, trying to generalize the soil across the county. right? I don't see much A, so I would not be in favor of using any A's for any type of existing components. I think it would have to be somewhere in the B to C. If we want to be really conservative, would stick closer to C values. And then for proposed conditions, understanding that there's compaction involved, earthwork movement, et cetera, your C soil probably turns into a D soil by the time you're done construction, right? But I think as part of current requirements, when you do your analysis currently, the engineer's choosing existing soil types. So they're getting the NRCS printout and it's showing B. By the time they're done with construction and compaction, it might be operating closer to a C, but we don't have a requirement where your proposed calculations should be taking that into account.
Right.
And so that's kind of the ideas of however we want to go in this direction. We would be making some assumptions and some generalities and throwing off the table potentially some of your A values. Now, we could write into the ordinance, like, again, this is the simplified method. Maybe if you're going into the engineered method and you're providing some soil borings and you get classification and you're showing that it's going to be A soils, then maybe we allow for that and you can use that. So, I think there's ways we can come up with a pretty solid way to simplify this, make it easier. And I think part of the concern everyone had was the engineer's ability to kind of try to, find the little nooks and crannies to get in, lower rates, higher rates, whatever, put it in their advantage. I mean, to me, the TR50, this table, there's no, this is the biggest tool in that toolbox to be able to do that.
I got a question didn't the WDO used to say that
Lake counties did, yeah, you'd have to bump it up a soil.
to D?
It does still.
It
No, it
does
says you have to do it to
One
D.
class.
D soil,
That was just upper class.
No, it used to be up one class, now you have to have D.
except for areas that you deed restrict as like with natives or something like
Right.
that.
So
Which
that's
I'm
the
happy to do
same,
similar.
that's the same thing that he's proposing in my mind.
Right.
Whether you're stating it or not.
Yeah, similar idea. Except I don't necessarily want to go to the Ds. I'm open to using Cs or a combination of B or Cs. We have 3D mapping, so like we can get as sophisticated as we want to develop this table. And that's my point is if we're going through this effort to do a curve number table, I don't want to do it with the C value. I think that correlation, obviously, we just went through that exercise where it lines up. So we're just doing it one time with the curve numbers and being consistent from that perspective.
But to Darren's point, if this is a GIS exercise, it's really not to harvest the soil type.
Yeah, we could. I just don't have the tool for it currently. That's and so like we could, like this would be, this is, brand new. We're starting out and we feel comfortable here. We'll throw out some curve numbers we feel comfortable with. As we kind of get underway and hey, this is working really well, then we can add some layers of sophistication on it. But I don't want to get too sophisticated too quick. And especially if Lake County is like, hey, we're going to do D soils. Not that I want to copy them, but there's precedence there for
They're a little
using-
less, porous. And like
Absolutely. So I think it from that perspective, it makes sense for them. For us, if we want to toe that BC line, then I think it would still be appropriate. Now here's the kicker, and I'll go into the detention design. If we choose our existing conditions more on the AB, you'll see there's a bigger impact in your detention. It's a spoiler alert. So how we set, so you can, however our conservative mindset is or whatever we think to kind of capture the majority of the situations and make it reliable for our ag community or anyone that's developing to use this and feel comfortable and give those people security that the development next door isn't going to kill their crops or flood their septic system. We can bake those decisions into this curve number table idea, and then again, we can ramp it up if we want to later on.
Is there a reason why we don't just have them, if they're doing the simplified methodology, and if the goal is to be simple, is there a reason why we don't just let them calculate the C value? And I mean, the rational method is the simplest
Yeah, no, I
Going
would,
around.
but so the idea would be when we're doing these, when we're going through this calculation, right? There would be a tool, you click and it pulls the area off the LiDAR data, right? Off that tool, it's also gonna show you a flow path, but we need to ask the person, is it paved, is it grassed, is it rocky, right? So they're not doing a calculation, they're more or less answering questions designed to do the calculation. So if they put in it's grassed, then it's gonna pull the slope for grass, it's gonna pull that V value, it's going, that velocity, it's gonna be able to generate that TC for them with just asking them questions. Same thing for the curve number. Are you ag? Do you have soil? Are you pasture land? Are you,
So the C value, or the CN value 74, that was just grass in open space grass, is that?
yeah, it's at a C-type soil? Yeah, I think at a C-type
Because when I
soil.
look at, so you got a C value, in your conversion, you got a C value of 0.63. When I'm looking at lawns in the highest C value for a lawn, which would be heavy soil, clay soil, steep, the highest C value I'm getting is 0.35.
Well, I don't know what to tell you because you've got a poor condition C value for grass in the tier 55 that's 89 and you have impervious area at 98. So again, which would you trust? Do you trust the curve number tier 55 or do you want to trust these C value tables? I haven't seen a consistent database to show me, here's a collection of all the C values. Everybody uses this tier 55 methodologies. The C values, I go to different sources, I get a bunch of different ranges. So that's my only pushback there is if you trust, which one would you trust more, curve numbers or the C value rational method? I guess to start as a simple question.
So I guess my point isn't which one do I trust more, I guess my point continues to be the conversion from one to the other is, I don't think is a consistent conversion. That's the part, so everything else I totally agree with what we're looking to do here, but when we start putting together a technical, manual, whatever we're gonna do here, and we've got something that when we put in the parameters and we're getting out something that completely doesn't match in C values, that's where I start to get a little bit nervous. Can we just tell the people, hey, you either gotta do curve numbers or do rational method, but the switching back and forth in my mind is gonna be where we're gonna run into trouble.
But I'd like to back up though. You said in the table that you have, you don't see anything higher than 35. So it's saying that grass in that table is only gonna run off 35%. I mean, I'm looking at curve number of 89 here, 80. That to me, difference there already, so to me, it's not about the compatibility. To me, it's just, that's saying one thing, this is saying another thing, and so I think which one is more accurate to me is the main question, because if you're going with 35%, then your curve number can't be up at 80. There's just no way. So
I think we're both saying the same
So
thing.
what happened in the translation?
well, that's my thing is, I wouldn't trust the number that Darren is reading. That's my point. I wouldn't trust that.
These are out of like the rational method, you go to, everyone's manual, that's the
I
rational
understand,
method.
but I wouldn't trust it, that's my point. Because the rational method, the 0.35 is direct 35% from that area. But here you have curve number based on soils that say that you can have much higher than that, but that's saying no, you can't. So at some point, you have to trust one or the other.
So I would say we just stick with one method or the other, and why would we want to convert between the two if we're all agreeing that they don't convert?
Because you need a C value for the rational method. And if the C values are not reliable, and you want to rely on curve numbers, then you just transition them and use the percentages, and it spits out a C value for you to be able to get a better flow analysis, in my opinion.
But don't you want to limit the number of choices for curve number? To say instead of,
Yeah.
40, 50, 60, whatever you TR 55 now, to 6. So
Sure.
you'd have pavement, you'd have lawn, you'd have ag. We can determine which ones make the most sense.
Right.
And then those convert to the C value.
Right.
Which then gets used in the rational method of the
Right.
simplified method, and then it's easy. And then we don't
Right.
have to worry about the conversion because we've already determined what it is.
If you don't want to take the raw data of basically saying that a curve number of 88 gives you 7.12, which is 83% of the storm event, that's fine. Then when we, as Scott mentioned, if we have the different types of cover types, then we can assign some C values to those. And if you feel that a curve number of 88, you don't like 83, it should be closer to 79 or whatever it is based on, information, then it's fine. I just feel like this is the most reliable. I understand where the C values come from, and I understand MWD adopted this and everybody adopted that, and I think the idea is that, everybody doesn't want to deviate from something that's been adopted and quote unquote proven, but that was a discrepancy that I found. When I was trying to come up with a C value table, I said, wow, this is not reliable in my eyes, because you go to 1, cap is 0.35. When I used to do calculations for pervious areas, I never used anything below 0.45. I just never did. And that's just, taking a look at it and saying how much runoff is going to come off of it. And so I just felt like this is more reliable. And since it's a percentage base, you just run your percent.
It's conservative also. So the conversion process is a conservative outcome.
I guess my concern is overall, this is like, we are talking about very specific coefficients that were developed with these, formulas in mind, with all these other factors that we're not even considering. You know what I mean? Because we're not digging into the math and all the charts and stuff. Like, I just think this is beyond our scope of trying to create this chart that if it were that easy, it would have already been created. Like, I'm just not sure if somebody dug into this theoretically that this would hold up. I don't know, I just feel like we're venturing into something that is beyond our scope. To your point, like.
But if, what Scott had said, if we just, rather than using a calculation to get from one to the other, just provide people the description and allow them to, if we're gonna give them a certain number of curve numbers, and give them a certain number of C values.
Right.
But that's the idea. No one's choosing a curve number. They're going in and they're choosing ag or grass, or and we can throw in there like, what's your grass coverage look like, good or poor, and whatever they choose, it's going to have the built-in curve number, and then the C value. I'm just saying you can easily pull that C value based on the curve number and the cover type. If you guys don't like it, or Jody, I agree to your point, but the bottom line is, if you're going to be using calculations, I think you need to understand what they're saying, right? You can't just,
Right.
This is the engineering philosophy of, well, the program told me to design it at a 24-inch pipe. You can't do that. And so, if you look at the rational method, that's how it's broken down, is they do an area, they do an inch per hour intensity, and then that C value literally just represents percentage. That's it. And it's not even 1-to-1, it's 1 to 1.01. But everyone accepts it. And so if you have 0.5, it's a 50% number. So why don't we just take 50% of what 8.57 is in the tier 55 for rainfall? That's all I'm saying. And 50% is what, 4 something? So that's a curve number of 64. I don't know how much more direct and easy it gets than that.
I got a question.
Yeah,
When defining that curve number, do you go with the existing property is now, or when it's going to be completed with the development?
both. You would do both. Current standards, in current standards, you use existing curve number to get proposed flows. So it's not, it's in this scenario, you would go to, let me go back, where am I? You would do an existing calculation. Hey, before I do these improvements, here's what my land looks like. After I do these improvements, here's what my land looks like. And then you're comparing the difference. Is it gonna be a significant increase in stormwater runoff to where you're potentially causing a flood risk for your downstream neighbor? Whether it's ag, a septic system, a pole barn, someone's house. you know, and so you're making, so there's assumptions built in that a certain flow rate isn't gonna overwhelm a certain type of infrastructure, pipe size, ditch size, et cetera, that we're obviously making here. And so you're able to, you know, if A, then B, then C, then, okay, you're good, or you're not. And then it's up to you to make, you know, potential improvements. Mike mentioned, can I throw in some ditch checks in there? Can I elongate my flow path instead of a straight shot? I meander it a little bit. You know, now you're making those improvements to help reduce that flow, right? Those are proven methods. We do this with restoration currently. Do you have a thought?
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of a project where I wanted to swale around like a quarter of an acre, like 52 times to get my flow path elongated to do this. So it's just like the evil side of me thinking about all of them.
Did you actually do that?
I believe it got constructed for a Walmart
Okay.
up in Wisconsin.
Well, I mean, theoretically though, right, you put the ditch checks and everything, then it should operate like that. Now,
You know, it's unmaintainable. There's a certain theory versus real world stuff that I always get caught up in.
So I
which is
guess,
part of the ordinance, we would be looking for long-term maintenance, and, you know, that's something, that's a discussion we'll have in the future in developing that type of practice, but, yeah. Sorry, Mike.
I would say that from developing regulations perspective, that sometimes you have to make a conservative, you gotta look at what the end goal is, so I think I think what you should emphasize more, I understand this conversion issue, but I think the end goal is what you just said, is that you're trying to create conservative criteria using these methods so that when you compare existing and proposed, you don't cause damage. So similar when we created like the wetland hydrology criteria, you know, we used the 2-year flow and we just picked 80 to 150 as a hydrology requirement. So it's kind of out of the air. But our wetland people studied it over a period of like 15 years, and they picked wetlands that were designed or that were impacted in this 80 to 150 zone, and they concluded that it worked. But it was kind of like in the beginning, we didn't know if it would work. But the goal was to kind of just make sure that the wetland survived, you know, in the long term. So I kind of equate this, there's other examples in the WDO where we went with things like that. And so from a regulator standpoint, to try to, you know, create a frame so that it's, you know, kind of more uniform across, I can see, you know, that's one of your goals, obviously.
It is, I mean, the west side of the community, right? That's why Board Member Von Bergen said for these larger parcels, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever it is, 1 acre of impervious, is it really gonna be an impact? And do you need to provide detention for it? And some of these are linear surfaces. So it's not even, you know, a box. It's linear surfaces that are spread out over a long, you know, length as well. And this is designed to help show or provide that you don't need to spend a lot of money on an engineer to get your hands around it and be able to implement it. And I think that's been part of the issue as well, is that if in simplifying this and we're making some assumptions and building in conservative ideas behind it, allows more people to take advantage and implement impervious areas in safe ways. And also not only that, but if they don't want to do detention, that they don't have to. I mean, Brian brought up the extreme case of winding a swale, you know, but it just opens up the opportunity for more ideas, more uses of the property, and that is the long-term goal and so that's why the simplified method is supposed to, that's why we named it the simplified method, is supposed to resemble that methodology, that idea, with that idea and goal in mind, as you mentioned. So you definitely put it very well. And appreciate you for summarizing that and bringing the WDO example as part of that. So yes, that is the goal. And obviously I don't want to, as you can see in the language, there's no exemption for agriculture, so this would apply to everyone. And that's ultimately, if I can do that as well, then that would be really appealing because it's not just one side of the county. It works for everyone if it works. And with these examples, you know, with the large 77-acre parcel, yeah, 1 acre isn't really gonna have an impact. And even at that, from that perspective, because of the downstream infrastructure of that swale that's in place, maxing it at 10% is not really going to be an impact in terms of the high water level. Now, with our watershed planning, we can start to look at on a sub-watershed scale. I don't know, you know, you start to add these up, is it gonna be an issue for the creek 3 miles downstream now? You know, I don't know, but that's the idea between the ordinance is kind of at the property lines. The watershed planning we're looking to do expands beyond that, and that's why there's the language in there for the enforcement officer to have the ability to require additional analysis or information based on any potential flood studies that have been done. And this could be coming from a drainage district if you guys end up doing a flood study, right? And say that, hey, we've got a constriction here and an issue, and then off to the side, we've got a developer that comes in, then you know, that can be used to say, okay, there needs to be some additional requirements because the drainage district did a flood study here and they're showing that an increase of X is actually going to be detrimental and cause flooding.
The other analogy with the wetland hydrology is, you know, the wetland group, the people given input during that period where we're developing the criteria, you know, they were throwing out a lot of ideas like what DuPage County uses, like doing an inundation analysis, you know, of all these storm events and stuff, and the reviewers were just like, we don't want anything that complicated. So the 80 to 150 really simplifies that. And so that's the other reason we offered it, which is a simplified method, just kind of what you're proposing here. So instead of creating this wide range of intensive analyses, you know, that is a simplified method, and it has been proven out.
And that's why I like using the curve number, because there's already a table and we can pull from that information, and it's just a decision on our end. Do we want to use C? Do we want to use B? Do we, you know, how we want to open it up? But I haven't, you know, I've been leery of going into those details because I first, to your point, Mike, I just want to make sure that the process and method makes sense. And you know, if at the end of the day you're stuck on a little technical hiccup, well then, you know, let's move forward with these ideas and start working on those, because we haven't been working on those. It's just been kind of, you know, talking about it a little bit, but I haven't instructed my staff, or we haven't been working on a curve number table. Just haven't, so we can present that, and you know, ultimately once we work out all of this, we also, you know, I want to start working on the actual spreadsheet, what that's going to look like, and then open it up to you guys, and we can, you know, we can go into it. And then if you do have some issues with a particular, let's say a particular cover type, you think the C value should be adjustable, let's discuss and we can adjust it. I think that's, to me, that's easy to do, as opposed to, you know, in terms of the process, that's just you know, a value and a matter of engineering opinion and expertise on what should be the amount of runoff we would consider from this surface. And that's the phase we haven't gone into yet. And so, but I can understand asking those questions now because they're a part of it. So as they show you the calculations, obviously it's appropriate to ask that, but so I didn't have anything more to share on this. So it was just these two examples and showing with the rational method. Really the main purpose was to show the flow differences in these two examples between the rational method and using hydrographs. That yes, there are differences, but when you're comparing the flow rates, they still seem to tell the same story, if you will. And so to me, that feels like a reasonable enough idea to move forward. And as reviewers, again, the language isn't set. It's a work in progress. As enforcement officers, obviously you always want to give the ability to address those 5% that are unique and different, that maybe, hey, you know, this is not what this was meant for, and you know, we need to look at this situation a little bit differently. So, and that would, you know, give you the cover to do that, or the ability to do that, or ask those questions, you know, that the applicant needs to provide the supporting documentation or calculations as to why it's appropriate. Any thoughts? I don't know.
I
Yeah.
have an overarching comment. I think it's exciting that you guys are trying to put together more tools for people, because obviously the more that information people are armed with, the better it is for everybody involved, right? Villages, enforcement officers, property owners. I guess my concern is I know we're calling it the simplified method, but I guess what we're finding out is just, you know, from all of these discussions, there's really nothing simple about it. You know what I mean? There's a lot of different things that go into these calculations that I think we're trying to boil down into something that's just a one-click easy step, which would be great. Oh my gosh, I would love that, right? But there's just a lot behind it. So I guess that's where some of our, I don't want to speak for Darren, but that's where some of our stuff is, where at least where I'm coming from is, this isn't as simple as we would always like it to be. You know what I mean? So trying to boil it down into a one-click just for a property owner is, yeah.
Well, here's what I'll say about that. I mean, you take a car, you take a cell phone, do you know everything that's going on behind that? No. You know how to use it. It's simple enough. And I think there's no reason why we couldn't do this. Now, we will be responsible for some of these technicals and what happens under the hood, right? That's what we're here for. But at the end of the day, what the user sees, if they're required, I mean, with the tool, hopefully, now again, we won't have that. So can you delineate a tributary area pretty easily? Sure. You can get a time of concentration pretty easily. I'm talking for the engineers.
Mm-hmm.
You can. You can get a curve number or C value. You can. So now it's just, how do you do that? Well, you're looking for certain things, right? And you're answering certain questions. Well, what's my ground cover type? Well, okay, well, let's figure out a list of choices. Okay? Person should be able to go outside in their backyard and figure out if they have grass or ag or is it wooded, right? And then choose that. This is also going to come in for review, right? So if they chose grass area but it should have been wooded, then there's an ability to address that. So I don't think it's that complicated when you actually think about it. It's just like driving a car. You don't know, I mean, I certainly don't understand everything about, you know, the engine and, you know, all of that stuff. Do I need to so I can operate a vehicle? So would someone need to know all of this stuff to operate the tool? That, you know, that would be my response to that component. And it's something that I do want to get to a certain point where that can happen. I'm not going to just roll out something that is a mess. And the idea was to try to use GIS to helpfully create kind of a, you know, what I think of as like EcoCat, right? I mean, you go and you answer questions and it does this and then it spits out an analysis. Something along the same
your
lines.
taxes in your 20s, right?
Sure, doing it tax season, if you go on, you know, if you do your taxes, they try to say, do you need this form? It populates it, right, gives you the instructions, you answer, you know, go to this form.
And if the
Maybe
vision
not as complicated
is,
as taxes, but.
if the vision is, you know, GIS, because to your point, StreamStats, you click on your point, it gives you a time of concentration.
Right.
It gives you a range of time of concentrations. So, you know, then we could eliminate the time of concentration spreadsheet or his, you know, snake swales. So,
Just using what I know.
Hey,
Just using what I know.
Don't be down on the snake swales. Before long, you're gonna see snakes and swales coming in.
BMP, that is, except the BMP.
like for us right now, I look at the simplified method is I take the MWRD spreadsheets and hand them to a young engineer and say, fill all of them out, and then we put them together to arrive at this data.
I'm not familiar with MWD, but if it's a similar type process, like, sure, or well, not that I'm not familiar, but it kind of came into the non-consulting side when they were making those changes, so.
Yeah.
But it makes me think of like the Chicago spreadsheet. If you've done work in Chicago, they have a spreadsheet, right, where you enter in information. Theirs is complex from what I remember. I don't know if they've simplified it,
Talking
but
about pre-ordinance, like the 3-year method.
I don't know. I just remember,
Almost
so
had
what
a
it would have
spreadsheet.
been about 9-8 years ago now, they have a spreadsheet you download and you go in there, like, do you have a green roof and how big is your wall? And so you answer those questions and it spits out information. Someone has to review it. And so they'll say, hey, you entered in this number, but it should have been paved instead of grassed, you know? So, so from, it's not quite that complicated, but something easy. Yeah, we want area, we need time of concentration, and we need that land cover type. And so there's very minimal inputs. Now in the beginning, because GIS isn't going to be able to do something, that part we'll have to put on our website that, you know, maybe we'll put a tutorial. Here's how you delineate a tributary area. Here's how you get a time of concentration. For the engineers are going to be able to do it. And for anyone coming into those sessions, we're going to be doing it for you. Once we get those tools up, someone can use it regardless. Maybe nobody wants the tool. Maybe everybody wants to come into the session and have us do it for them. How often does that happen? All the time, right? You know. So from that perspective, the people that are trained to use it will have that ability without any issues. Those that aren't, we're going to provide the assistance, or those that know enough can still go in there once we're live to you know.
It'll be like the car mechanics, right? So if you don't know.
I don't think it's too sophisticated. Like I throw out the car example, but I don't want to.
See, I can drive a car, but I have a mechanic.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Right, something goes wrong.
Yeah. So yes, and that would be also like, you know, you as the city engineer, village engineer would be the mechanics for that system. But this would be a system that, yes, it would be designed to simplify things. Give those folks that have been struggling to say like, hey, I'm on 80 acres, you know, and you're telling me I need detention. Now they have to spend 20 grand on an engineer. Maybe they can save that money now. That is, and to Mike's point, that's one of these goals that, you know, I have to, I want to explore this completely and say, hey, we hit this roadblock, we can't do it. So I can go back to the committee and tell them why. Or we've got a path forward, we're going to need to take some conservative, you know, inputs and information and boil things down. Here's what it looks like. And it's a good starting point to Mike's idea, the 80-150 rule. As this is implemented and people use it, I don't know, maybe now the other counties are going to look at our method and be like, hey, let's adopt that. And people are going to start using it more, and then maybe we'll get more information as to, hey, this, if you guys do this, it'll become better and we can improve on that. So that is the driver, I guess. I do, like Mike's point, I don't want that to be lost. And this allows also for those folks that don't have means, that want to, you know, we see it a lot with these estates that come in, you know, and things like that, or, you know, 10-acre ag parcels that want to do a pole barn and ag, and because they're post 2004, they're going to be triggering detention. right? And now they don't need to, and if you tell them that they need to spend 20K on an engineer, you're killing their project with regulations. Which I don't disagree, sometimes you need that engineer. But I think we should have this in place to see, do you even need an engineer? And if you do, again, it's an analysis on like downstream infrastructure, and having this tool available should hopefully lower the cost of what the engineer is doing as well. I mean, I don't know, you guys are engineers, so you tell me. Sure.
So I wasn't around, or I don't recall the gymnastics that they went through to do the 8150 rule, but, you know, I did enough work in Lake County that I just accepted it, right? Whether it happened or I wasn't party to it. I think what we're having here is that everyone in this room, these two methodologies, they predate us. They're all we know, right? And we believe that they both have their place somewhere, although I will admit, I hate the rational method because I don't think you can do stormwater on a napkin, but that's beside the point. If we believe that the two can be equated in some way, shape, or form in a simplified method, and this can be distilled down into a form, why don't we just have them run both and you pick the higher of the two, and that's your solution?
Actually, yeah, I just did that
I
for
like
a
the
site.
Chicago method where you can pick the lower.
Well, I mean, they're supposed to be so close that the difference should be minimal, is the discussion point we're getting to, right? Is that
Right.
we believe that
Right.
discrepancy is inconsequential, I guess.
So what we could do is, because this has to go in for, you need to provide this information to the enforcement officer. By providing the rational method and showing it works, then yes, on the back end, staff is gonna have the ability to run the hydrograph to verify it. And so we could tie that into the
It
ordinance.
takes the liability out of it, and I think that's
Yeah,
another piece
well,
of this.
I think that's what I was trying to say, though. The enforcement officer always has that opportunity and say, hey, I don't think this is appropriate, the simplified method is appropriate in this situation for one reason or another. So yes, I always want to have that ability because there's a flood study out there, or it's more complicated than just boiling it down because you've got other factors to consider. Maybe there's off-site factors that are a big deal here. This doesn't factor in off-site, as you can see. So, yeah, that review is always on the responsibility of the municipality or the county for us to make sure, because if we approve it and then someone has an issue, doesn't matter. You know, there's going to be a reaction, consequences to it regardless. And so, yeah, that safe haven is still there. I would just move away from an applicant that wants to submit the rational method. They're not going to be able to do the hydrograph method potentially. So the question would be, if you're gonna do both, is staff doing the hydrograph method for confirmation of the rational method? Because because then why have a rational method if you're gonna make them do both? That would be my only point to that, philosophy, right? There's no point to it then. We might as well remove it, and the engineer we're going back to kind of this idea where the engineer is always involved. Just a thought. Which is not, or which is part of, the goal is not to do that, if you will.
But we're creating a system where we equate a C value with a curve number value, right? So in reality, regardless of the method you use, it would kick out the value associated with the other value. Would it not?
I don't think so, because this rational method, I mean, sure, I'm using a curve number to get a C value, but it's not, so, let's see, this time of concentration is 15 minute. If I go to the critical on the 15 minute, I'm not equating them at all. I'm just using curve number as a ground cover condition for my C value of what percentage of this flow is running off. I'm not trying to equate the two. They are different. I'm not disputing that fact. But when you, and so you're gonna get different numbers. All I'm saying is that when you use one method or the other and you compare an existing and a proposed, sure as heck gives you a pretty reliable flow difference to then compare it to. Are we greater than 1 CFS or 2.25? Yeah, all right, well, you need detention. Are we less? Okay, you don't need detention. This is for 1 acre. The 10%. Are we greater? Yeah, you need detention. Or you do that analysis because you already have downstream infrastructure to show that your tenth of a flow increase is not being met. So that's all. And there's no, you don't use both. I'm just saying I can't use a spreadsheet to produce these results cleanly. It's a very labor-intensive manual process, period. That's why the TR55 manual designed a graphical solution after running continuous models for type 1 and type 2 storms. So if we want an easy tool, we got to use the rational method, and I just was hung up on the issue with the literature giving me too many different C values and to me being unreliable, because yeah, I would see literature that says grass areas 0.1 to 0.25. I would never accept the 0.25 C value, personally. I just wouldn't. I don't think you're going to get only 25% runoff from turf grass. So that's why I didn't feel comfortable with the C values. I want to use curve numbers. I think they're more accurate, and that's my reasoning behind it. And so then all I did was I looked at, well, what does the C value represent? Well, it just represents the percentage of the flow that's leaving the site. Well, okay, if that's the case, I can just take 8.57 as 100% and go from there, and I have my percentages. And then a certain, 8.57 inches of rain equates to a curve number of 100 in the 100-year event. 7 inches of rain equates to a certain curve number, right? Which is also a certain percentage. To me, it was like, oh, it's simple. Just do the math, you get a percentage. So yeah, I'm using curve number, but it's not being used in the same way. It's just more to make sure that you more reliably understand what percentage of the flow is flowing off site. That's all, I guess. So in using the rational method, if we feel comfortable with this, understanding that there is going to be some differences, and maybe there's a cap. If you're greater than 100 acres, hey, this stuff really breaks down. I haven't run enough of these. I just kind of ran the 2-acre example. It got me within 1 CFS, and I ran the 77-acre example, again, within 2 CFS or so, 3.
But the acreage is based on the tributary area within the property. So you're assuming the whole 77 acres goes out one spot.
In this example, it does.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
does. Yeah, it does, because it
Okay.
all drains to the swale that goes out.
Okay.
Yeah, right. In the other example, the 2-acre one, let me see where I have the picture. That's why, technically all of it sheet flows, but I had cut my tributary area along the middle of the house, just to highlight that. But there's probably a better example I could have picked, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time finding the perfect site, just one that would demonstrate the idea cleanly.
There is no perfect site, so
Yeah,
that's
so,
fine.
but that's why I had drawn it here. But you could in theory say, well, this is everything flows down to kind of this property line, so you need to take all of it. Sure, you can take all of it, but that's not what I did to demonstrate that point. So yeah, it is based on tributary area of where your project is. That's why the LiDAR data would help delineate that. You'll get a flow path, you'll get a slope, the person, and the TC currently is it grassed, is it paved? That's the only thing you're pretty much answering. And it comes off the chart here for velocity. Where's that chart? here, these are known values. So if you know the slope from the tool, whatever it is, the person answers unpaved or paved, you're gonna get your velocity. They're not doing anything, everything's happening behind the scenes, just like the car. But you gotta know how to put gas in it. You gotta know, the area, tributary area, the time of concentration, or if you do your own oil change or whatever. But anyway, so yeah, it's all there. I'm using all information that's there, all equations that are there. I'm just putting it in a process, a technique that allows us to meet some of these goals to simplify things for constituents.
Question, just to clarify something Mike had asked. So the area of impervious depends, the 10% obviously depends on the size of your site, but the analysis that you're doing is based on like real tributary area,
Yeah.
off-site and on-site, is that correct?
I don't have off-site factored into this, which we haven't discussed, with the idea that the off-site wouldn't be changing. So, because if you start to factor in off-site conditions, then it becomes a little bit trickier, right? Because then it's like, well, how far upstream are you gonna make them go? That's where the 1/10 of an increase comes in for flood risk, of how that definition works. So on your particular property, if you have a less than 1/10 of a foot increase, then and that's how floodplain works when you're analyzing like flows to the river or the bridge. You're looking at your direct impervious area input, right? But you're capturing the flows just upstream and downstream, and you're showing that you have a less than 1/10 of an increase on that river height, and so you're allowed to move forward with your development. You're not taking into account necessarily the rest, but other than with a tributary or idea. But you get my point. So yeah, I don't make them go upstream with the idea that the 1/10 of an increase locally would satisfy minimal flood risk. Kind of along floodplain management methodologies, if you will. Looking at
So who's determining the 1/10 of a foot and whether or not there's downstream flooding issues? Do you have to get a letter from the downstream property owner?
In this case, no, I think it would be more of a known issue. So this would be where we want to do our watershed planning to put some maps together to show some critical areas of where flooding occurs. And once we have those, then in the ordinance, we can define those in the watersheds and say if you're in this watershed, maybe it's not a 1/10, maybe it's lower, maybe it's something else, but without that information currently, to Mike's point, we'd just be kind of taking a stab. But even, I'll throw something else in there, even with the letter from the owner, I don't know that that's enough, technically. I mean, maybe they're buddies, guy gets a letter. I mean, I see that all the time. Oh, I got a letter from my neighbor. Okay, great. I still have to do, check the calcs and.
Yeah, I mean, at least you know they're not gonna be suing each other. That
Today.
probably.
Well, they come after us.
Right.
As much as I'd love to prevent as many people suing each other, I don't know that we'd, But yeah, Steve, I think that's where if we feel comfortable with the 1/10 of a rise, then we're making that general assumption that there should be minimal flow. I'm not saying zero, but minimal to the point where is it going to be an impact? And I think that if it's, if you're analyzing that downstream swale and you do see like, whoa, there's a house right there, then maybe that's a concern that you want to bring up, that the existing water level doesn't give enough freeboard, that maybe in this scenario you need to have zero increase, right? So Yeah, that should be built in. That's that B letter, which, again, it's just thrown in there as a placeholder to capture that, where the enforcement officer may require additional off-site analysis to be incorporated into the calculations due to known flood risks. And that can be modified in some way, but I don't want to make it too broad, because I think part of the idea is that we want consistency between how the county reviews it and municipalities. If you open it up too much, then there could be a village engineer that all of a sudden is requesting all of this extra information all of the time when it's not intended to. But I agree, you could have that situation, and so it goes back to this idea, how many of those are we gonna have across the county? Are we looking at a small percentage, 5 to 10? And we're hitting a 90% mark with everything? I'd say that's pretty good. We're never gonna capture 100% and make everything, work that way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when it comes down to providing detention and you're restricting things down to 0.15 CFS per acre for new impervious area, you inherently should have less flow coming off the site.
Well, let's segue that into detention requirements then, because I think this idea is meant to say I guess ultimately, are we comfortable with saying that if the downstream infrastructure is a pipe, a difference in flow of 1 CFS is deemed minimal, to say, okay, we're not concerned about that. For a swale, 2.25. I guess that would be the first question, because if we are, then I think everything works. And then to transition, the next part would be looking at detention requirements and moving away from the 0.15, which I'm ready to do that.
So neither of those scenarios that you brought up, they'd still both require detention, based on the 2.25.
The smaller site, yes. Technically, this wouldn't even qualify because it's sheet flow, it's not going into a ditch, swale, but if it did, this would not qualify, that would not qualify for the exemption because it's greater than a 2.25. In the larger example, if you're just doing 1 acre of impervious, it would qualify because it's not enough of an impact to see any type of real significant flow change. And that's both represented in the rational method and the critical duration, because you literally, you're zeros.
Oh, that was just for 1 acre though, you're saying?
Just for 1 acre. In the 10 acre, you can see the flow
For the
difference
10%,
here.
Yeah.
Goes up to 9.42, so it's saying, hey, you're gonna either need detention or you can go get the engineer to analyze that giant 50-foot swale to see if you have a 1/10 of a foot increase in that swale or not. And what I did was I analyzed it and I showed a 0.02 foot increase in that swale if you go up to 10%. So that would still mean you don't need detention.
Okay, but those 1 CFS and 2.25 aren't in the ordinance, those are just numbers that were derived from something.
Yeah, I ran
So we're
a,
just doing a 1/10 in the ordinance is saying a 1/10, but not necessarily the 1 and 2.25.
I have it, yeah, that's where the language would here, that simplified method would have some definitions and broken out. What does the simplified method mean? It means exactly that, 1 CFS for a pipe, 2.25 for a ditch. Those numbers come from these examples. All I did in those examples is I attached pipes to them. And I ran it. And I looked at what gives me a 1/10 of a rise in the model. These are the numbers right here. So that's why I suggested 1 and 2.25. I think in the smaller one, I can't remember, it was very similar. Actually, I think it showed like 0.99 CFS or something. So a little bit different there, but right around that one. So that would get defined I didn't want, again, I'm trying to keep myself from doing extra work if I'm not gonna get everyone's, buy-in on it. So if it seems like I've got everyone's buying on it, I can start to dig into this. Because this is gonna trickle down to a lot of other parts of the SMO we haven't even talked about. Like some of the adequate downstream capacity analysis, some of this directly addresses that, in my opinion. So let me jump into looking at the time. And I love when you guys talk, but I also, understand all of you have jobs and you're not paid to be here or have things to do. So the release rate now, the 0.85. I did, so I will be honest, one question I would have for the group is if we wanted to keep a 2-year and 100-year release still, it seems like what I've seen is a lot of folks just going to 1 4-inch, at least IDOT prefers that. So kind of throw that out. I don't want an answer now, but just out of curiosity. I have not tested numbers on the 2-year. I've mainly kept with the 100-year, just knowing that that's going to be the most important. So what we did was we still have that 0.85 CFS reduction for proposed impervious area and any proposed cleared area. That cleared area we'll need to define. Okay, so that'll be a detail on what that means. And it'll have a definition, but for the most part, it means like wooded area where someone's coming in, like a solar farm, to chop off, clear a whole forested area. There will be consequences, or maybe it's wetland area as well. So more to come on that. But what I ran for you guys is just so you can see where the analysis comes from. That's your updated sheet here. I don't have it on the screen, but let me go through it. So what I wanted to show was, I just kept it to a 1 acre because then you can extrapolate that to 2 acres, 3 acres, etc. So 1 acre of impervious area, 24-hour storm event, curve number of 98. Your time of concentration isn't really going to change the peak flow. It's 0.994 CFS. So when we were developing the 0.85, we basically looked at, okay, well, if I'm gonna impose the current release rate requirements of 0.15, and I assume about 1 CFS, well, then my release rate is going to be 0.15. So to get down to that, if we want to use the same kind of ideas, Steve, to your point, making sure that you have confidence with detention being able to improve the situation, then it would be a reduction of 0.85. So what I ran here for you guys, and in the updated table here, is I ran 1 acre scenarios using different soil groups, A, B, and C and D for grass. So I gave the curve numbers there. And I showed at the different acres, so 0.25, half an acre, 0.75, 1 acre. Those are the flow rates on the left side of your sheet here, of the line. What I then did in the middle area on the revised sheet is I showed what would be the release rates based on proposed impervious area, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, and 1. What would the actual release rate look like? So what I did first was I showed for 0.25, your release rate is 0.04. So it's just straight calculation, 0.25 times 0.15, right? So those are the values. And then for a 1/4 acre, your release rate is 0.67. So it's the 0.04 from your impervious area plus the 0.75, because now you have a 1/4 of an acre impervious, 3/4 of grass, from the D. And again, don't look up here. Let me pull up the actual. Throw it up on the screen here in 1 second. Here, so here's what I'm talking about on the screen. So if you have 0.25 acres of impervious, you're going to have 0.75 acres of pervious left. So from your 0.75 acres, you've got 0.63 coming off. From your impervious, you've got 0.04. So your total release rate in that particular situation is 0.67 CFS. And so you can compare that to what you would have in our new method. If you have 0.25 impervious area, well, you need a reduction of 0.85 CFS per acre on that 0.25, so that means 0.21. So what you're actually doing is you're reducing that 0.21 from your original 1 acre, right? So now you don't have to line things up. It's just a straight reduction. So at a half acre, I need to reduce my 0.84 by 0.43, or roughly do the math, 0.42, so on and so forth. So you can compare the different release rates for the different type of curve number values. So remember when I said whatever rates we pick, if we stick with existing conditions that mirror A and B, your release rates here comparatively are going to go down more. They're going to be impacted more. If you compare that to the current method, you're actually getting better reduction in the flow rates. And so to me, the 0.85, I think we're getting the same type of results, but if you're doing 1 acre of development and you're only doing 0.25 as impervious, you still have to do a release rate based on your 1 acre, so you're always at 0.15. Because you're getting dinged on your pervious areas, although we know that on impervious areas you're going to get some compaction. Hence the idea of having an existing and then your proposed curve number does have that bump up to account for potential compaction. That was kind of the discussion that we talked about, right? But with the current method, it doesn't ding you, it doesn't take it out on you. So if you're developing a full 1 acre, under the current standards, your release rate would be 0.15, regardless of impervious. Does not matter, doesn't take it into account. Under the new method, you would be releasing at 0.63 because it's saying, well, you're only doing 25% of your property is impervious, the rest is pervious. So there's no need to have you do an additional reduction. That's where the cleared area comes into play, because if you're clearing an area, then potentially a wooded area is, and again, I've been briefed on Scott that not all wooded areas, and is there grass underneath and herbaceous and all of that, we would need to define those definitions. But this to me ties in again with the simplified method, with the curve number method, and it all just works really well together. And you're still getting that benefit if you need detention. The other thing this does is it doesn't drive you necessarily towards detention because you're able to use your curve number as part of that. Right? So whether you're doing a snake swale, or you're throwing in a native garden, or you're doing natives on a solar farm, you're getting those benefits. We know it works as long as it's established correctly and maintained correctly, which are two separate conversations that we want to have and try to see what that's going to look like. We're taking steps on our end to work with some other partnerships that are developing kind of green infrastructure maintenance ideas. They're some kind of newer techniques and things like that we're a part of. At a bare minimum, we'd probably start with like the urban manual has some of this information, but some other folks are thinking about these type of things across the region, so it would be great if everybody was on the same boat to like maintain a vegetative filter strip. You need to mow it twice a year, you need to X, Y, and Z. Then that particular owner, if they feel comfortable, they're like, okay, yeah, I can implement that. And then that information will get submitted to us in kind of an annual report as verification. Yeah, it's going to be more work, but we're taking steps to become more digital and kind of automate a lot of those processes to be able to potentially handle that.
I mean, isn't this just encouraging you to put in more impervious areas so you can release at the existing 2-year release rate rather than the more restrictive release rate?
No, because, I mean, it's a hierarchy.
But
Right?
if you get to .07 on the proposed impervious area for, or whatever, all those are negative,
Yeah.
which means you can go to a higher release rate.
No, because you would have to go to infiltration first and then, yeah, the existing 2-year would be the existing 2-year. If we wanted this to not say existing 2-year and just call it whatever, .15, you know. So here's the hierarchy. Maintain existing drainage patterns, infiltrate, and then the existing 2-year peak flow rate. Now, again, that example is just on one, acre parcel, but no, it's not, because if you do more impervious, you get penalized further as well.
I think there's a sweet spot though, like there's gonna be a bump in the curve where you're gonna be penalized, but once you put in that extra little bit of impervious, to Steve's point, you're gonna then get kicked from a very, very small release rate to then bumped up to the 2-year.
Yeah, I mean, it's in here as a placeholder, so we can take a look at that a little bit closer. I think where that probably, the idea behind that is that if you are bringing in development and you're making someone operate at the existing 2-year peak, won't that give you confidence that it's an improvement, right? So, if we want to make it more restrictive than that, we certainly can, or less, or whatever. But that's why that was chosen, is that regardless, you're going to get. But there's probably going to be other scenarios where you're right. There's probably some project somewhere where they're going to analyze that, and if they just increase their impervious more, then sure, they can do that potentially. Which that means like, okay, well, they're paying more for a larger building too, so there's other, I feel like, other consequences to wanting to do that. But
Maybe a way to somehow encourage them to incorporate BMPs on their site, right? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do.
I think that's the intent, right?
if you guys remember, we did the BMP section, so that is definitely a part of that. That's why this is meant to work in tandem, is that it's supposed to incentivize the reduction of impervious area, more BMP use. So, yeah, like I said, I think initially when I was working on it, I just wanted to get some structure to it with just some hierarchy on if you encounter that condition. And I agree, I mean, at some point it probably drops so low to where, like a 0.14 realistically, what does that restrictor going to look like? And so that's where maybe we can say, if your allowable release rate drops, maybe there's a minimum. If it drops below that, you're held to that, if it's 0.2 or 0.15, whatever, that is. And so the main idea with this is just to show the process again, and if there's no questions on does it work, I think this shows it does. Does it work too well? There's some like the existing 2-year, and we got to think of these, this hierarchy a little bit better. I'm happy to move into that phase of developing this, and open to ideas.
It seems like it's more restrictive than the current ordinance. I mean, if you just made the current ordinance based on the only impervious area dictates your allowable release rate rather than hydrologically disturbed area, which potentially would affect the whole lot, but you're replacing it back with grass. So I think that's where you're seeing, with the 0.85 CFS reduction, all those release rates are lower than the current, ordinance requirements if you just had impervious area only as a basis for your release.
No, yeah, and so I've always told you guys, I don't know if the .85 is the right target. I just know that if you're looking at worst case scenario of 1 acre of impervious, then, you know, that's what you're looking at. But I would, you know, yeah, you're right. Currently, if you say that your allowable release is just based on your impervious area, then the detention, you know, the only problem though is that, look at these numbers. What is your release structure gonna, how are you doing detention then?
Well, those are the numbers based on the impervious area, but.
Right,
if
but
you
I'm saying
drop-
that's your allowable release rate.
Right.
Yeah,
right,
whereas
because-
I'm saying your allowable release rate is something bigger under this condition. So if you have 1 acre of development, you're in this .15 regardless. Whereas if your 1 acre development only has .25, you have a higher release rate. So it's not true necessarily that all of the release rates in this scenario are less than this scenario.
But we're waiving up to a half acre, so this is just a small, you know, you're using.
Yeah, I threw the .25 in there, you know, I was looking at it, I was like, you're not triggering detention, but maybe it's a scenario where the site overall, you've already triggered detention and you're doing an improvement on the other side of, you know, or something like that, I don't know. So if we focus on the half, right, if you're doing 1 acre of development, your release rate is .08 from that half acre.
But you could get that waived, right? Is it up to a half acre or half acre? We're waiving,
Oh, up to 1 acre, as long as you show that there's no flood damage currently.
oh, and it used to be a half acre, right, or 20,000 square.
20,000 square feet, yeah, so I would just
Roughly.
change it to half acre, I don't, you
Yeah.
know, 20,000 square feet, everybody's half acre, quarter acre, it's a very minimal difference, 3,000, 4,000 square feet is the difference. So yeah, this would be your detention trigger. Well, let's just say like if you look at the 1 acre, like it's static. I think that's the big thing is it's static, regardless of how much impervious area you're doing in that 1 acre development. And so the new
Well, that would be
method,
100% impervious on the 1 acre development, that's why it's all at .15, right?
no,
Because you're at
No.
100% impervious.
no, you're 100% hydrologic disturbance. I'm just in this scenario saying proposed impervious area, but it's hydrologic disturbance. You could be hydrologically disturbing 1 acre is what I'm saying, and you would be at .15, which is no different than 1 acre of impervious, you'd still be at .15. Those are the same under the current
Oh, yeah,
regulations.
because it's hydrologic.
Hydrologic,
The
right.
new one is just for impervious area only.
Right, so if you only, so in this scenario, if you have 1 acre of hydrologic disturbance, but only .25 acres is impervious, you're still at .15 here versus .63 in this condition. So it's not, so the release rates under the new condition are not all showing that you're gonna have a complete reduction.
Right, well, I'm just saying that if you need to compare apples to apples. So that the proposed one should be based on impervious area only with the .15 CFS per release rate on just impervious area,
So if you
not
look at-
hydrologically disturbed. That way you'd be comparing the
Sure.
.15 to the .85 reduction.
Right, which I agree, and that's the idea. The more impervious you go here, the more it's gonna take it out on you.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. As an incentive to do more BMPs, do more green infrastructure, lower that impervious acreage so we can get infiltration, groundwater recharge, yes.
And we did that .15 impervious area only in the current ordinance, you can see you'd be able to have a higher release rate. So you'd be encouraging, you know, less detention, I guess. You'd have less detention by having more pervious area on your site.
Okay, I mean, yeah, so, but it would still be the same idea that you're analyzing your tributary area versus your hydrologic disturbance, or your hydrologic disturbance, you no longer need to do .15 CFS.
Right, yeah.
But in your example though, we talked about putting the cap on it. So if you don't go negative, you go to
Yeah.
0.15 then, right?
Well, if we want that to be our cap, yeah, or it can be 0.2, or, you know, I mean, those are very small. So that's why I asked the question, like, you know, for the 2-year, release rate calculation, and sometimes that hole becomes so small. You know, should we just go to 100-year, have a limit, you can't go below that, and that would equate to, you know, like you know what I mean? Like,
Okay.
but I didn't do like 0.04 for, you know, 0.04 cubic feet per second in the 2-year. Again, it's the same idea of 0.2 using the same relationships.
Okay, I forgot about that. But so go back to that sheet.
Yeah,
So that's what Darren was talking about, was it at 0.75 acres of proposed, you're at 0.2, and then at 100%, you're also at 0.2. So that's where you can increase without any penalty.
in here,
Because if you go negative, right, you'd go to the 0.2, right? So in
maybe that's the
actuality,
cap. Yeah.
right. So in actuality, that would be 0.2 for the 1 acre.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's 0.15, if you guys want to make it, you know, 0.15, then they're capped at the 0.15, which is what this is telling you. It doesn't matter what you do, you're always going to have 0.15, right? You can't go below 0.15. I'm okay with that. If you prefer 0.15 versus 0.2 or 0.25, 0.3, I don't know, MWD is a little bit higher, 0.35, I think they have. Haven't looked at their stuff lately. But whatever that is, yes, you would get capped at a certain point to understand that, are you really getting any more benefit? I mean, really, that would be my question. Are you getting any more benefit from a 0.2 to 0.05? I mean,
Depends on the size of the site. We're just looking at 1 acre here, but if you like multiply this out by a factor of 10 or 100 for a larger site.
Right, but then you're not going to go negative, though. You're not going to go negative in that scenario. I can do that for you guys. I can go to 100 acres. You won't go negative, I feel. I haven't done it, but... And plus, I'd have to vary the time of concentration, and this is just time of concentration, 10 minutes. So now you're forcing me to go to those examples that I showed you guys previously, of real-world examples, what the detention would look like, and I can pull those out.
And you wouldn't go negative on those because the impervious is just a smaller percentage of the site.
Yeah. Right. And in the one scenario, I can go back real quick and not think we would. These always surprise me. Oh, look at this. No, it was not this. This was presented. Maybe it wasn't. Bear with me. Yeah, so like this example, right? You've got a total acreage of about 8.23. Their proposed was about 5.5. So I don't know what the percentage is of that, but you can see actually what ends up happening is this tributary area is depressional, so your existing flow rate is 0, which the current regulations require you to take account for, right? So no matter what you do in here, you're going to go negative if you were to maintain that, and that's because of the depressional, and that obviously would make sense. There's depressional, you got to account for it, et cetera. So it also is able to infiltrate quite well, but in the proposed conditions, then you're changing it all to where you've got 7.56, 5.45 acres of it are in that, so you need a reduction of 4.63. So that would push you negative there, and it highlights the issue of changing tributary areas and the depressional area in here. And that's why you're going negative, and that's why the hierarchy is meant to drive maintaining drainage patterns. And then if you can't, you go to infiltration, and then there's that cap. Or whatever number, if it's not existing, if it's something. Or maybe it is a calculation, hey, you're 0.15 times your hydrologic disturbance. Sure, we can have that as kind of the catch, I guess, but, so, and that 0.85, we can adjust that 0.85. I mean, maybe it's 0.75. Just, this is the 8150 question, Mike. You know, I don't know the 0.85 versus the 0.75. Or, you know, this is just, you know, based on analysis, here's what the 0.85 does. But I think regardless of what we do, it's always going to increase in the amount of detention you need as the more impervious area that you are proposing. And that's, you know, that would be the incentive that we want to create behind it. Also, the thing, you know, the reason I like this reduction is it allows you to, again, incorporate other methodologies. So I brought up the solar farm idea, or in this case, it can be any ag property or anything. If you've got long impervious surfaces that trigger detention, are you going to actually provide detention, or can you provide 10-foot of native areas, vegetated areas, buffer areas that offset that? And so that's why I like this method with the reduction, because you get that ability to offset. With the other method, you don't really get the ability to offset, because yes, you're triggering detention and you have a release rate, but what do? You have to pipe it or you have to detain it. Whereas this method, you can offset that by incorporating the full tributary area and accounting for it into the release rate. So that's the main difference between the philosophies, why I would prefer a reduction as opposed to a hard release rate requirement on impervious, not all hydrologic disturbances, is you don't get those benefits, you don't get to use more tools in the toolbox to address the flow. So it allows farmers to take advantage of that, it involves commercial properties to take advantage of that, it allows lots that are funky and constrained and have different tributary areas to take advantage of that. You're not, you know, one of the other things here that you're not going to be hit with is undetained areas, right? I mean, that's not spelled out here, but it happens where you get hit with undetained areas. But really what an undetained area allows you to do is say, okay, well, I've got 2 tributary areas and I'm going to do 2 acres of impervious here. I'm going to take the undetained hit over here, but they don't go to the same place. That downstream owner is going to get impacted severely. I don't know how many times that happens, but you know, again, we're bringing that threshold from capturing 60%, maybe now we're at 70, 75, 80, whatever it is. Sorry.
I had a question. If you go back to one of those examples, are we always just looking at on-site, like this one right here? Even if they had drainage area coming from off-site, are we always in this analysis just looking at on-site area?
Yeah, so one of the committee members talked about looking at off-site, because if you're changing, if these 3 areas, and just simplifying it, we're going to different properties, and now you're changing tributary area 2 to come down here, then potentially you are impacting off-site as well. Yeah, and so they actually mentioned that we might want to look at off-site areas. But it would really only come up if you're changing tributary areas. And so if you're changing tributary areas, you're rerouting more on-site, which means you potentially are rerouting more off-site. I think it does factor into the equation. It's just another level to it. I don't have it in here, but it was something that they said, hey, we need to incorporate that into the analysis. So it would be something that would factor in from that perspective when you're changing tributary areas, and I haven't wrapped my head around how to bake that in yet. But
We're
yes.
calculating detention, we're only looking at the on-site area. Like when we're looking at the existing release rate from, like at a certain point of discharge from your site, you're
Yeah.
ignoring the upstream area, is that correct?
I think that would be a fair assessment, because I think if you are rerouting tributary areas to the extent that you are, you're gonna hit negative, and we're gonna cap you anyway. And if we cap you, then, yeah, I guess that's a question, because now you do have no tributary area coming through, or if you bypass it, then that is an additional bypass flow that wasn't there originally, right?
I mean,
So that could be a potential problem for the downstream property. Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm aware of that. I haven't thought about or explored options of what it would look like to incorporate that. So it was just more of, we're good with the process, so we can get into those details, or are we still seeing issues? You know, and like I said, the 0.85, it's not solidified. Again, to go back to the simplified method, 1 CFS, 2.25 flow difference, that still has, we can still modify that. But the general ideas on the process and the procedures and how everything's meant to flow and work and tie into other parts of the ordinance, BMP's wetland impacts. Hence the cleared areas, to just help discourage that a bit further. Not paving over the entire county, so we can get that groundwater recharge and have sustainable water for the future. Those are part of that comes into play here, that doesn't pop off the page. That, yeah, we're also looking to make sure that we don't pave every surface, otherwise we don't have anyone drinking water.
I like it from a concept standpoint.
So all I'm looking for, obviously. No, I think that's what I wanted to get to, so we can start talking about this and figuring out ground cover types and getting into curve numbers and all of that. And so I kind of thought we would get to this point today, and hence asking for the reprieve from the April meeting, because now staff is going to go in and kind of keep busting through and throwing stuff at you guys and figuring out the technicals with you, and what's under the hood now, and making sure we have values that we feel are consistent and representative. And so we can share that, like to your point, we can share that in the appendix, so people have the understanding of where it's coming from, or we have a technical manual that hasn't been updated, so that might be the next part that goes after we update the SML. Obviously, that manual is going to be pretty useless if we're changing a lot of these ideas. Maybe it's explained there so that people, when they start using it, to Brian's point, they don't really need to understand what's under the hood. They just know that it works and it drives them from point A to point B. But if someone wanted to, they can take a look at that and what the philosophy and the background is. And I certainly want to establish something where 20 years from now, this looks a lot different in this room. The people then can go back and say, what the heck were those guys thinking?
Well, it would be the same people here.
I like your optimism.
A long-term commitment from Mike. Anyone else?
Mike's number to 2038.
No, and so we kind of jumped around in the, just to close out here, we kind of jumped around in this between 5.1 and 5.2, but if there's no other discussion at this point, and from a conceptual, I hope I did a good enough job of kind of over these past 3-4 months, it's been sharing it with you, and and it's almost like that, as engineers, you're usually giving me information I haven't seen before. Now it's kind of reversed, right? So I got to convince you guys that anyway. But if there's no other discussions, then in the May meeting from now, staff will go ahead and start to kind of continue that deep dive of updating the ordinance, and hopefully we'll have something for you guys, like a curve number table. It's not going to be complete, but it'll be something for you guys to look at and react to, and we can, develop it and start to talk about some of these other things and how everything ties together, and making sure that it all works well. And then the next part too that we're hoping to give you more information on is the wetland components. On last agenda, I had it as a future topic, but obviously with schedules and everything, we haven't really been able to work on that. So I didn't put that here because I didn't, it's still a lot of work, but we're hoping to have something as part of, continuing this update in May, which will kind of be the last part of the ordinance at that point that we haven't updated. And we started with the general permits, cleaning a lot of that up, going through exemptions, defining dredging, et cetera. And so now we're, at the tail end. All right, well, if there's nothing else, we'll move to future topics or announcements.
Yeah, an announcement. Next time.
So I saw your hand, so we'll move into announcements. Scott?
All right, so I mentioned it last time, so we are having our second annual Lake McHenry County MS4 workshop. This will be May 15th, so Friday, May 15th. It's all really come together pretty amazingly. We're going to be focusing on green infrastructure. We'll have Jeff Edstrom from the IEPA talking about green infrastructure, the goals that they have at the IEPA now, and then funding opportunities for green infrastructure. We'll have Jack Pizzo talk about the proper way to establish natural native vegetation and maintain it. If you haven't seen his most recent presentation before, he really does a magnificent job explaining this. We'll then have the folks from the University of Illinois Extension talk about their new certification program for maintaining green stormwater infrastructure. Pretty exciting program that they're developing. Soin was alluding to that a little bit in his presentation. And then we'll have Brad Andresen, our own Brad Andresen, talking about green infrastructure in Algonquin. And then we'll have a case study from Lake County, where they have, Lake County has helped get 319 funds and to fund projects. They oversee the projects or monitor the development of the projects, and then the municipality will be providing a case study of how they've utilized those funds for a green infrastructure project. So, I mean, it's bookend to bookend, everything we need to know about green infrastructure ties very closely to what we're talking about in here. So it would be a great program. So May 15th, free and open to the public, room for about 65 people to attend in person, and then we will be live streaming it as well. And we'll be sending out save the date notices next Monday.
Where's that at?
This will be at Lake County's Central Permit Facility from 8:30 till noon
Where's that, Libertyville?
in Libertyville.
So,
And then we have our annual water forum every fall. So this fall it'll be September 16th, Wednesday, September 16th. And the focus will be on water sustainability. Our discussion about water sustainability is really going to start amping up. So it's really a very important topic, and it'll be a great opportunity to learn about water resources in the region. So that'll be September 16th.
and then I will be sending save the date for that training that I mentioned previously. For those of you that are out, there will be a session in April or May. I'm just working on some of the details in IT, but I will send out those dates so you guys can, and times so you can have it on your calendar. I'll follow up with kind of a sign-up sheet. So if you are an enforcement officer for a municipality, we're going to have limited room. We might fit everyone that wants to come. I don't know. But I would, the request would be that if you are directly involved as an enforcement officer, or if you are from a municipality, come in person. It's meant to be kind of a dialogue as I go through the ordinance. Questions can be asked. There will be a virtual option, so if you want to have staff under you or something like that, attend and be familiar, I request that, they do it virtual, but leading up to it, we're gonna show how many spots are filled up, so if there's still openings, you can obviously have the opportunity to switch. So just working out some of those details with IT before we release the email for the sign up, but just a reminder there. And Ernest, DOT staff, if you guys, want to send someone, you can, sure, why not? With that, do we want to adjourn?
Motion to move.
Okay, by Mike,
Second.
second by Darren, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned.
And the water forum's at MCC.
Ernest, so, yes, on
Increasing the
the subdivision part.
and then,
That would have
can't wait to go
helped a lot
we
with
actually
this
have two
particular
lines.
one.
Exactly.